Bilingual development in children. Now, when children are learning a language or an additional language, because we are talking about bilingualism, then we need to keep in mind that as we move towards the 21st century, more and more countries, more and more regions are now encouraging bilingualism. And that is why, especially in Western context, you have lots of guides and newsletters for parents regarding how to encourage bilingual children to use different languages, what are the ways to nurture them, and even at neonatal clinics, there is a lot of advice that is given to the children or to the parents how to sort of support them in terms of language learning. Now, as we said, in several Western contexts, also where there are daycare centers, the parents are encouraged to leave their children, very young children, at these daycare centers where they expose them to different languages, because bilingualism has generally been recognized to lead to higher cognitive abilities, because it requires the children to process information that is more complex. However, there are contexts in which bilingualism in children or bilingualism in any case is discouraged. And we have the case of several countries. For instance, you have these Kurdish speakers who are not allowed to use their languages. You have several other contexts. In Asia, for instance, it is very common for the parents who tell their children to speak only in English and not to speak Urdu. The schools also emphasizing the same thing, because you feel that if a child will develop this habit of learning the second language, then the learning of the first language will somehow interfere with the learning of that second language. Now, this is all about this behavioristic approach in which language learning is seen as habit formation, which is quite discredited in today's world. And then there is, of course, this question of identity and ideology and the state's policy of assimilation. In any case, when we are talking about child bilingualism or adult bilingualism, and we'll bring out these differences more in the coming modules, we need to keep in mind that over here we are making this distinction between learning and acquisition. So when we talk about learning, we talk about learning in formal context, that is in schools, and we talk about acquisition, then we are talking about language that is almost subconsciously picked up from a given environment where it is being used for different functions. So this is a distinction, as we said, made by Gresham, 1981, and he talks about how language learning process could also be somehow mapped out on acquisitional process, and that forms to the basis of communicative language teaching. But we need to be very careful of how far we need to go with these structures, and we will discuss this sometime later during this course. So another distinction that is made between bilinguals is whether that language has been acquired simultaneously, that means at the same time, or one language was learned after the other language. So over that is to say, if they were learned sequentially. Now more and more this distinction between simultaneous bilinguals and sequential bilingualism is being blurred. It is blurred because more and more children are exposed to two languages at home. More and more children who come to school are much younger, and more often than not, they are learning two languages almost simultaneously. And that is why we have Swain in 1972 who feels that actually a good way to look at it is that at times the first language can also be bilingualism itself. So it's not just one language, it's two languages seen as the first language. So we are now, as we talk about it, we are talking about child bilingualism. This is because it is only in childhood that you can be simultaneously exposed to both languages. And in any case, when you learn the language, for instance, one after the other, and one you have more proficiency in one language over the other, then even they need to be seen not as second language learners, but as emergent bilinguals, as we discussed before.